Gene Roddenberry is an icon of science fiction. Being the creator of one of the most successful and popular science fiction franchises in history, this is only natural. But over 50 years on, Gene Roddenberry isn't just credited for the franchise's creation, he is seen by many fans and the general public as a visionary genius of transcendent caliber, the last word in deciding what is and isn't quality Star Trek. But this image of Gene Roddenberry and his place within Star Trek is hugely overblown. Now I want to say right up front, this video is not designed to bash Gene Roddenberry. I have been a Star Trek fan for my entire life, it's one of my favourite things ever. To spend a prolonged period of time doing nothing but shit on the guy would be foolish. What this video is designed for, however, is to give a reality check on Roddenberry's legacy and the degree to which he's worshipped by Trek fandom. Gene Roddenberry is often created with the creation of Star Trek, which is of course true. He was largely inspired by a series of Horatio Hornblower novels, which saw an intrepid captain exploring the seas and shouldering the burden of command. His primary sci-fi influence was the sci-fi classic Forbidden Planet, which features many of the tropes Star Trek would later adopt: a united Earth exploring the universe, the ship's captain, science and medical officers being the central trio of characters, and science fiction being used to tell stories which inform on the human condition. Being a writer on various western and crime shows, Roddenberry was a proven, reliable talent in the industry, and eventually began shopping around his initial concept for Star Trek. While it is often Roddenberry who is created with these socially progressive themes of the show, equal credit should also go to producer Gene L. Coon. Coon, like Roddenberry, had written for several westerns, including Wagon Train. Wagon Train often featured moral stories with a strong anti-war sentiment, elements he translated over to Star Trek. While in development, Star Trek was even dubbed the Wagon Train to the Stars to give studio execs a clear picture of the kinds of stories the show would tell. Gene L. Coon was also instrumental in the creation of several Star Trek staples, including but not limited to the Klingons, Khan Noonien Singh, Zefram Cochrane, the name of the United Federation of Planets, as well as Starfleet Command. Along with Coon, D.C. Fontana played a hugely important role as the show's initial script editor. Fontana made often uncredited rewrites and polishes to numerous Trek scripts over the course of the series, and it was largely thanks to her that the quality of episodes was maintained. It's no coincidence that the weakest season of the original series was the one without Coon and Fontana. While Roddenberry was the creator of the concept and many of the characters, when it came to telling stories within the universe he had devised, it was through collaboration we Trekkies were given the classic episodes and celebrated tropes of the show. Roddenberry's actual script contributions to the show are a mixed bag. Out of the top 10 ranked episodes on IMDb, none of them are episodes written by Gene Roddenberry. It was the task of a team of other producers, writers and script editors who saw Roddenberry's ideas translated to the screen to the success it has become. Roddenberry's name is often placed alongside the likes of George Lucas and J. Michael Straczynski as the head honchos of their respective franchises, but I generally see this as a misnomer. George Lucas, for example, was the producer, writer and director of the first Star Wars movie, not to mention the owner of the production company and VFX company. Over both the original and prequel trilogies, George Lucas was a writer, director or producer on all of them. He was the main creative force behind the entire franchise for decades. J. Michael Straczynski was similarly important in the creation of Babylon 5. He was the main producer behind the show, and out of its 110 episodes, he wrote 92 of them. That is unheard of for a network television show. Gene Roddenberry, however, wasn't even the primary showrunner behind Star Trek. Even on the big screen, Roddenberry only ever directly produced the motion picture. While he collaborated with Alan Dean Foster to come up with the story, the screenplay was written by Harold Livingston, and it was William Shatner who came up with the ending. From The Wrath of Khan to The Undiscovered Country, the main creative force behind the Star Trek movies was producer Harvey Bennett and writer-director Nicholas Meyer. By the time The Next Generation rolled around, Roddenberry returned to a producing role, but once again he was not the showrunner of the series and only wrote 3 episodes, all of which were collaborations with others. Gene Roddenberry certainly came up with the idea for Star Trek as a concept, but he is not the creator of the Star Trek franchise. Since day one, a long line of producers, writers, directors, and even actors have contributed greatly to the Star Trek universe. It's a creative ensemble chipping in their own ideas for stories, aliens, characters, organizations, themes, and ideas. To credit Roddenberry as the mastermind behind it all, in my mind at least, does a disservice to the fantastic work and creativity of many others. It's usually at this point someone comments something along the lines of, at least they were adhering to Roddenberry's vision, not like modern Star Trek, but this simply isn't true either. I've often seen fans call everything from the original series to Enterprise as Roddenberry Trek, and everything since as JJ Trek or Kurtzman Trek. This distinction, however, makes little to no sense whatsoever. As mentioned before, Roddenberry had essentially nothing to do with the majority of the movies. It was Nicholas Meyer who spearheaded the tone and style of The Wrath of Khan, with his own unique take on the Star Trek franchise. And while it is routinely held up as the best Star Trek movie ever made, widely adored by the fanbase and maintaining critical acclaim to this day, Gene Roddenberry hated it and all subsequent Star Trek movies. The chief contribution I brought to Star Trek II was a healthy disrespect. Star Trek was human allegory in space format. This was both its strength and ultimately its weakness. I tried through irreverence to make them more human and a little less wooden. I didn't insist that Captain Kirk go to the bathroom, but did Star Trek have to be so sanctified? So here we have what is widely considered to be the best Star Trek movie ever, and it is a massive departure from Gene Roddenberry's vision. And the following 4 films, being headed up by the same creative team, remained as a departure from that vision. Even in The Next Generation, Ronald D. Moore has spoken about clashing with Roddenberry's insistence that characters on the Enterprise were not allowed to argue with each other. Which seems baffling considering the great thing about the central trio of the original series was Spock and McCoy butting heads while Kirk figured out what to do. And following Roddenberry's death during the show, this remit was certainly not followed. This is often why Deep Space Nine was for the longest time seen as the black sheep of the Star Trek franchise. Its stories were made in a conscious effort to challenge and even subvert Roddenberry's vision. Deep Space Nine deconstructs the image of a peaceful utopian federation. It addresses the horrors of war head on. It even showed Captain Sisko and other Starfleet officers committing what can only be described as war atrocities. Modern Star Trek such as the Kelvin Timeline movies or the recent Discovery have done nothing with Star Trek that hasn't been done dozens of times before, and persisting with the notion that recent incarnations have taken missteps because Roddenberry would disapprove is an argument which simply doesn't hold any water, but this speaks to the overblown status Roddenberry has often taken on in the Trek fandom. If you haven't seen the documentaries Trek Nation or Chaos on the Bridge, then I implore you to do so because they are revelations on the legacy of Gene Roddenberry. The former follows Roddenberry's own son as he sets out to examine the impact of Star Trek and discover more about his father, whom he had a sometimes tense relationship with, and the latter chronicles the chaotic early years of The Next Generation and the clashes between various production team members, including Gene Roddenberry. I'm not here to air out all that dirty laundry, but these 2 documentaries convey a truth which I think more people should become accustomed to. Gene Roddenberry was a flawed human being, just like everyone else, and to create something special and as unique as Star Trek to begin with is no small feat. While science fiction before Trek was often informed by the time, Asimov's Foundation series for example and even the aforementioned Forbidden Planet feel very 1950s in style and social attitudes, Star Trek was a conscious effort to evolve the depiction of human beings of the future, but it's this idea behind the original series and the franchise as a whole which has often become a strength as well as a weakness. While it provides a truly optimistic and inspiring message, remaining stubbornly attached to it can lead to the detriment of good storytelling. Ironically, Roddenberry's desire to comment on the human condition is sometimes hampered by his own adherence to the idea of a human race having grown out of its infancy, which in the end would have prevented so many great stories which are truly human in their own right. Starfleet crew clashing with Spock's customs, Kirk struggling against growing old, Picard's urge for revenge against the Borg, Sisko living with the tough choices he's made in wartime, Kirk living in his father's shadow, Burnham having to redeem herself for the terrible mistake she made. All of it is so human, all of it is so Star Trek, and a lot of it is not Gene Roddenberry's vision, but that's not always a bad thing. As I said at the beginning, this video is not intended as some character assassination against Gene Roddenberry, but while Trek fans are celebrating his creation of something they love, how about also celebrating the others who took that idea and solidified its place in history? We wouldn't have the Klingons if not for Gene L. Kuhn. We wouldn't have the quality of stories if not for D.C. Fontana. We wouldn't have Spock's Goodbye without Nicholas Meyer or Harve Bennett. We wouldn't have The Next Generation, Deep Space Nine, Voyager or Enterprise without the combined efforts of Rick Berman, Brannon Braga, Ronald D. Moore, Michael Piller, David Livingston, Ira Stephen Bear and so many others. And yes, without J.J. Abrams and Alex Kurtzman, we would still be talking about Star Trek as a thing of the past rather than as a thing of the future, which it should be. We should be thankful to Gene Roddenberry, but also to so many others. Tejas Raguram asks, what are your thoughts on the new Battlestar Galactica by the showrunner of Mr. Robot? I'll have more in-depth thoughts when more details are revealed, and of course I'll be making videos on it when it eventually comes out. But as for now, I'm pretty keen. Mr. Robot is a great show, and Sam Esmail is a pretty unique creative voice. I am intrigued by his recent comments about sticking with the Ronald D. Moore reboot universe as well. I assumed in a previous video that any new BSG would be the new movie version which Universal has had in development for ages now, but having this news come out of left field was very welcome. I'm excited to see what more BSG has to offer. Seth Davidson asks, if you got to pitch a modern Stargate show, what would you want to do? This is something I've thought about for a while, and I got pretty interesting feedback on my BSG story idea video, so if you'd like to hear the details, I'll make another video like that for a new Stargate show. Thanks for watching. If you like my videos, be sure to subscribe and hit the bell icon to stay up to date on all my new uploads. Over on my Patreon, you can see videos early. Speaking of which, I want to give special thanks to all of my patrons now appearing on screen. Until next time, have a good one, and as always, live long and prosper.